All right, everyone, welcome to the podcast. Let's jump right in to the topics. We have a lot to talk about today.
Right. And today we have, I think, some really exciting, maybe a little bit controversial topics. They're really going to hit home for me, I think. So I'm pretty excited to kind of go on the deep dive. And I want to hear what Dr. Shaw has to say about some of these things.
Yes, I think, we have differing opinions on a lot of these things. So I think it will be interesting to see where you land on this. Of course, with this pod, we're completely unhinged, not rehearsed at all. So I have no idea where he's going to land on this. We have a couple topics that we both pulled that we want to walk through, and we'll see where we both align on these. So first up, okay, is a article. This is coming from JAMA Dermatology, I believe, about natural skincare products and the allergens that we find in them. Do you want to summarize the article real quick?
Yeah. So there was an actual, what do you call it? Not a study, but an article just talking about how this idea of natural being safer has really come to the forefront, is really just taking, it's $1 billion industry that's just really people are making decisions off of it. I guess I should say that. They see the word natural, they see the word clean, and they're trusting those brands more. But then the article was basically taking a little bit from this study, saying that, even though they say natural and clean, it doesn't mean that they're safer, especially when it comes to contact allergens. And then the study itself actually talked about, we took a look at different stores. I think it was Walgreens, Whole Foods, and Target, and they just took a look at all of their skincare products. This was done out of Stanford. And then they took a look of the ingredients, and then they just determined what were the most common problematic ingredients. Mostly they were all natural, and they were mostly allergens.
Right. So basically, this is the article coming out of JAMA Dermatology, published September 14th, 2022, prevalence of contact allergens in natural skincare products from U.S. commercial retailers. So, so this is one of the things. And I think that a lot of dermatologists have spoken about this on social media, but it doesn't somehow penetrate into your average consumer. And it's basically this idea that things that are natural are somehow safer because they exist on this planet in some type of natural capacity. And I think even all of us sort of feel that way when we see foods, right? Like if you go to a place and it's like, oh, this is a natural food store, we sort of assume that means somehow it's healthier than McDonald's, right? Like we make this assumption that the natural food store is somehow healthier, right? And because it gives us a sense of like, oh, this must be good for you because it's natural. And the truth is, actually, even when it comes to health foods, we have no idea. We have no clue whether or not those foods are actually going to be healthier for us, or that they're not, cooked in something that's terrible for you, right? Now, a lot of times with food, it's a little bit more transparent. But when it comes to skincare ingredients specifically, I think that most people feel. How do you feel when you see the word natural? Does it give you a sense of safety?
I think it probably does, very subconsciously. And then actually, I was going to ask you something similar in that, what does it move you when you hear a brand come at you with a natural product? Because I think when people ask me about that, what I think about natural skincare, I actually I'm neutral. Like I don't let it move. I try not to let it move the needle positively or negatively, because a natural ingredient in my mind is still an ingredient, has a similar potential, good or bad, as any other ingredient.
Yeah, for me, it doesn't move me in any general direction at all. I don't feel positively towards it. I don't feel negatively towards it. But the truth is that natural is actually completely undefined, right? So we have some terms in cosmetics that are regulated, and then we have other terms that are not regulated in any capacity. And when you say something is natural, I could literally take, pure petrolatum, your Vaseline, which is, comes from refined petroleum or, fuel, and call it natural. And really, like, nobody is going to stop me, right? Because there's no like legal definition of the word natural. So I think that's the first part of it, right? Is like a company can use it in branding regardless of whether or not it's true. So that's problem number one. And then problem number two is that just because it's natural doesn't mean that it's safer. And that's what this study was showing from JAMA Dermatology. They looked at the ingredients in all of these different products that were claimed to be natural, and they found that they were actually high in allergens. All the products contained allergens, and oftentimes more allergens than in other skincare products that didn't claim to be natural. So basically what they're saying here is you like, even though it's saying natural, you're still likely to cause it could cause allergic reactions. In fact, it may be more likely to cause allergic reactions.
Right. And so I guess a couple things with that too. So even though natural is this undefined term, I think there's almost this accepted gentleman's agreement per se that natural means plant-based. I think if you were to poll the mass population and be like, "Oh, what's a natural product?" without naming it, I think they would list out plant-based ingredients and that's where it would end. So I agree the term is completely unregulated. Even if it was regulated, I don't know if it would change anything because I think there's this unspoken rule that it's a plant-based product.
Yeah, I think that's the fair assumption, right? But then you look at some of the ingredients in these products that are claiming to be natural, and they contain purely synthetic chemicals in them as well, right? And
Hmm.
maybe one of the lead ingredients is like a botanical of some sort that comes from a flower, but overall they still are using like preservatives, and they're using other emulsifiers in the product that are just completely synthetic ingredients. So even then, when they say natural, I don't even think that. Yeah, I think they may be marketing one ingredient that's natural, but I think overall it's not either 100% natural, or even if it was 100% natural, again, that doesn't mean that it's safer by any means. Like for example, I think this gives rise to that essential oil market as well, right? Because essential oils, right, are derived a lot of times from plants, and they produce a fragrance to them, and some of them have some medicinal properties where they do heal different conditions, and they've all been studied in different capacities, from lavender to tea tree oil to all these different things. And some of them, like you, are a big fan of tea tree oil, but still we find that a lot of these ingredients do have benefits, but they also do have a lot of allergic potential.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what the whole point of this article is. And I think that's one thing that the general public is missing. And you've already emphasized it already, but they just see natural, they think it's safer. But for me, tea tree oil is, I think, a perfect example because it is a plant-based ingredient. It is also an essential oil. It is also a potent allergen and an irritant. However, it's been studied and has a deliberate purpose. So I find it acceptable for use because it has its niche roles. But so for me, I treat it completely differently than I think the general population does, or how I grew up. I grew up in tea tree oil along with some other things like colloidal silver or grapefruit seed extract. We took that by mouth to kill worms. Just a little tidbit there, but these things were touted almost like cure-alls, and I still see that as a prevailing thought amongst the general population. Is this, oh yeah, it's natural, it does everything for you, it's anti-inflammatory, which is another whole broad term that means very, very, very little, medically speaking. But they can have a deliberate role, and some of those essential oils, like you mentioned, really do.
Yeah. And, I'm actually, I've always said this, I think that especially things that have been passed down from generation to generation, things that like kind of pop up like yesterday, I'm more skeptical about, but things that have been passed down from generation to generation, like you almost have to give the benefit of the doubt and say, what, like, if this has lasted 200, 300, 400 years, there may be something about this that is unquantifiable. And you know what? I'm going to go one step further, okay, and get into a little bit of conspiracy theory here. So I believe, right? So I traveled to Egypt this year, and I saw the pyramids, and I think the pyramids, are just, I mean, once you see them in real life, the scale of these buildings, these three pyramids, the main ones, it is just so astronomical, and it's like nothing you've ever seen before. And then to believe that these were built, that long ago, how did they have that engineering capability, right, to be able to build these? Like, it's a mystery, right? Like, nobody knows. I mean, there's theories, but really nobody knows how the pyramids were built. This is a fact, okay? Nobody knows who built them. Nobody knows how they were built. I mean, everything is a theory, right? Because there's no evidence. There was no writing on the walls of the Great Pyramids. Okay, so that being said, there was some type of wisdom at that time, and people that have studied this building, from the red quartz to different things in the building that were impossible to like engineer with what they thought the technology existed at the time. They knew something essentially that we don't know. And I think that there are a lot of things, a lot of ancient wisdom that we put our sort of Western medicinal minds to, and we say, oh well, it hasn't been shown in JAMA dermatology to be effective, and therefore I'm going to throw it all out. But I think there's something about ancient wisdom that we have to give a little bit of benefit to. I mean, as long as there's no like harm to it, like proven harm in recent times to it, then I think I'm a little bit. I'm a little bit likely to lean towards some of that if it's been around for many, many years.
Okay, so I don't wholeheartedly disagree with you, and I don't wholeheartedly agree with you either. So part of my skepticism, and I think we approach the same way in that, like, I think, in fact, I think most doctors are. I think doctors are inherently skeptical, especially of new things, because we kind of run it through this filter of not only our like bachelor's degree, our science degrees, our medical degree, our clinical experience, but then also, yeah, the whole idea that it has to be scientific, which means reproducible and like validated. But I'm particularly skeptical, I think, because of the naturopathic world I grew up in, where I'm actually finding that there are small studies to support just about everything, and it makes everything somewhat justifiable. And it's very difficult, I think, for people to kind of sift through, well, this study said this, or this small study said this small study said this. And we talked about this before, like rosemary oil versus minoxidil for hair loss. That's like a perfect example in my mind. There's a study showing they're comparable. And that's why I think for me, I may be a little bit more critical of some of these older things that have almost no data and there's nothing kind of showing that they're reproducible. So I'd be slower to jump on that bandwagon. But also, Dr. Shah and I worked in the same geographical part of this country for a while. And I'm curious if you've heard of this from any patients or individuals in the area. Do you have any thoughts on speaking out warts or speaking out the fire? Or has that something you came across from any of these patients?
Yeah. I've heard of this. Basically people like meditating warts away, or like having some type of like witchcraft to get warts to go away. No, I think that's totally bogus and unfounded, right? Like that to me, even though, because what the problem is with things like warts and alopecia areata and other conditions that sort of come and go, or are like have an unknown like a lot of times get better on their own without treatment,
Right.
like warts or molluscum contagiosum. Like these are conditions that get better on their own. And so I'm a little bit more skeptical of any treatment that is touted to benefit in those conditions, because like it could have just gone away like if you did nothing. And a lot of times there is no control group in these studies or in these reported like case studies of things like that happening. So something like that, I'm like, no, I don't think so. What do you think?
Yeah, it seems unlikely, right? I mean, I definitely am not a believer in speaking out warts, but I've heard secondhand from multiple people that it worked for them. And but again, I think that's a slippery slope and a danger that I don't accept. It is that
Yeah.
secondhand, firsthand anecdote, but it's extremely convincing for everybody else, like in
Yeah,
mass.
and you know what it is? You know what I think, right? Like as long as there's no harm being done, right? Like so for example, if you wanted to, right, do this, and you wanted your wart to go away, and you wanted to, and you believed in this somehow, it first of all, it's not harmful to keep the wart around most of the time, right? So I'd say, okay, well, depending on where it is, but if you have like a plantar wart, it might be a little bit painful. You want to wish it away for a year and it doesn't work, like come to see us, we'll treat it, no harm, no foul. I think when you start to get wacky is when there is something that is imminently dangerous, right? Like, some type of cancer, right? Like pancreatic cancer. And then you're like, I'm going to wish it away, or I'm going to, take some type of supplement that I read about in one study. I think you can do both, right? Like you can say, as long as they're not like interacting negatively, like I could say, well, I really like turmeric, and I'm a big turmeric guy. I could say, well, yeah, I can take my turmeric supplement, but I'm also going to take the chemotherapy that has been proven in multiple studies to be effective, right? And I think once you start getting into the world where like there's imminent harm, and then you start to like say, well, like I'm going to like lean into natural ingredients that have been unproven, I think that's when you start to get dangerous.
Okay, so yeah, I think that's very fair, but also very relevant. And so I've seen this firsthand in where they have had cancers. Some of them are a bit skeptical of modern medicine, and so they also see these naturopaths, and so they've opted out of certain treatments for very aggressive cancers and opted into natural, really just diet-based changes to try to cure their cancer. And I know that's just a small sample size, but I know that people all over the country and world are doing that. And I think the danger is foregoing a potentially effective treatment for maybe scientifically doing very little to nothing. But at the same time, some of those cancers and some cancers, there really isn't much that Western medicine has to offer either. And so again,
Mhm.
I think doing both often is reasonable. And there are actually a lot more studies now coming out with how does this vitamin dietary supplementation complement or work with or against this either chemotherapy, immune therapy, or modern treatment for skin cancers or cancers in general.
I completely agree, and I think these things can be supplemental to each other, right? Like, I definitely like you mentioned the minoxidil and rosemary. To give some context, right? There's a study that compares minoxidil or Rogaine, which is the only over the counter FDA approved for the treatment of hair loss. And then there's a study comparing it to rosemary oil for the treatment of hair loss, and they were equally as effective. And maybe the rosemary was less irritating in this study, right? And so then you say, well, it's one study. Like, is that like should I then now change my behaviors? No. Like when people come to see me in the office and they ask me like what to go get, I'm not like, I got the thing for you. Forget the minoxidil. I got you on the rosemary. In fact, a lot of times I'll say, the proven treatment here is the 5% minoxidil. Go out and get that. And then they may say like, well, I want something that's a little bit more natural remedy. And I'll say, actually, rosemary is another option, but I recommend that you do these two things together, right? Like if you're going to do it, do them together because you'll get compounded benefit. And so, I'm definitely not against them. And the other reason why is because a lot of the things that have withstood the test of time have come from natural ingredients in the first place, right? So, I always talk about salicylic acid. Salicylic acid came from the willow bark tree. Was then they realized like people were chewing on willow bark, their fevers were going away for 4 hours, right? So they were like, oh, if you chew on this willow bark tree, my fever will go away. I chew on this willow bark, this tree, it goes away, right? They actually thought it was going to be a cure for malaria, I think, but it only worked for like 4 hours at a time. They didn't understand why, right? Well, essentially they were ingesting aspirin. And then later on, I think like Bayer, one of the pharmaceutical companies, like were able to isolate acetyl salicylic acid or aspirin from these willow bark trees and then commercialize it. And all of a sudden now you have this medicine, right? And Western medicine is really pushing this. Now, if somebody came along and started chewing on willow bark tree again, we'd be like, oh, this guy's insane, right? So I think that at some point we have to say like, there are things we don't know. Like there are so many things we don't know, especially about medicine. And the more I learn about medicine, the more I realize that we don't know a lot, and there's a lot more to learn. And it's so humbling to study the human body. It's just like it's such a we're fascinating creatures from the ground up. The way that our minds work, the way that our bodies work, and I really just think that we need to give a little bit more interest in these natural things.
So I'm actually 100% with you in part of that. The humility thing, I think the longer, and we've talked about this before, but the longer I've trained, the longer we train, I think the more humble you become. Because I think the most proud I ever was probably after my second year of medical school, which is, for those of you who don't know, that's at the end of your purely academic portion. Because I had just ingested thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of medical information on paper. And then you get out into the real world, and during your clinical studies, your residency and fellowship, everything else or whatever, you're like, oh, wow, this is all fairly imprecise and imperfect. And so I think there is a ton of room for learning in any medical community. And I think probiotics are actually a perfect example of how Western medicine, modern medicine, has kind of adopted something that started out in the more naturopathic space. Because I grew up on probiotics, and that was like 30 years ago, I think. Probiotics, soy milk, rice milk, almond milk. It's been in buckwheat. It's been interesting to watch what's stuck around and gone in mass as to what I grew up with. And but probiotics, it's again, same thing. It's like, oh, this could be helpful. In fact, oftentimes it was touted, this is helpful for everything. And now we're coming back to a place, and like, especially for us as physicians and in Western medicine, it's like, well, this is probiotics. This is how it can be helpful topically in the setting of eczema to outcompete some of the bad bacteria on your skin, maybe internally to try to change the pH and provide a little bit of diversity, which I think is a nuanced thing in itself. Like if you're consuming a million live cultures of one bacteria, is that really promoting like bacterial diversity? I don't know, but it could definitely outcompete some pathogenic bacteria, especially on the skin.
Yeah. So like you said, I think that there's still so much for us to learn, and I'm open to learning, right? But most of the time with when people tout natural remedies in exchange of like things that are proven, right? Someone's got really bad acne. I think I see this mostly in the acne space with us, yeah, where you have somebody who has scarring forms of acne, and I'm like, and it hurts my soul to like watch these people suffer and come in, and then and then you have even some of these people making videos online, and then you see the comments, and someone's like, oh, well, do this sort of natural remedy, and I'm like, yeah, like that's great and everything, but this person's going to have permanent scarring. Like I know the natural course of this condition, and if we don't treat it aggressively with therapies that have been proven in the office, then this person's going to have severe scarring. So like it's not harmless at that point to make those recommendations. So I think that it just sort of needs to be looked at on a case by case basis. But going back to this article that we found here is one, the article showing that natural ingredients are not safer, right? I mean, this is scientific proof that natural products that are labeled natural. So to just summarize this in full for everyone as clear as possible, products that are labeled as natural in your stores, when you see them and you hold them, just be aware that there is scientific evidence that these products are no safer than products that are quote unquote not natural. Okay, so that's number one. And the number two part of this is that they actually did a sub-study, like a study before this, 2017 study, also in JAMA Dermatology, looking at moisturizers, common moisturizers, and found also, again, one, that there was a lot of allergens in common moisturizers. So that's number one. And even products that had claimed to be hypoallergenic. So that's another thing. So even when you're out of the natural category and you look at something that's labeled as hypoallergenic, again, hypoallergenic is not something that is regulated in the sense that we say, okay, if it says hypoallergenic, that doesn't mean that it doesn't even have fragrance, right? Fragrance is the most common allergen in skincare products, right? Still maintains today the most common allergen in skincare products is fragrance. And you'll still have products that are labeled hypoallergenic that have fragrance in them. And that's because they did a study on, let's say, 100 people, and they tested that product on their skin, and they found that 100 people didn't have allergic reactions. And so they're able to then say, this is a hypoallergenic product. That doesn't mean that if you have an allergy to fragrance that you're not going to react to this product, right? So like, I think that there's a lot of messaging in skincare labeling, not just on the natural side, but even on the dermatologist recommended side, even on the hypoallergenic side, that is a lot of times misleading to consumers who are just trying to make safe and effective purchases for their skin. So it really puts the consumer at the disadvantage here.
So with that then, like taking a look from the consumer's perspective, like we already said, fragrance is problematic. It's in both, from this recent study, it's in both these clean natural products, and it's also the most common allergen in all products. But like what are some things I think a consumer could look for that would help them navigate through this nonsense?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Like, I don't know what they're like, I actually thought, going into this, when I was studying, that like, if I saw something like dermatologist recommended or dermatologist tested or hypoallergenic, that these would somehow mean that these products were safer, and they're not. Like, it really needs to be case by case ingredient basis. I think there's a website called Skin Safe or something like that, where you can like type in a product and it tells you if it has common allergens in it. It's a little bit better. But again, like, we don't want to like fear monger people out of using products altogether, right? Because even in the study that we're looking at, the highlighted study today that we're talking about, they looked at the 100 most common allergens, the 100 most common allergens. That's a lot of ingredients to look at, right? So like, just because like, once you get down to number 100, that's a very low percentage of the population that's going to be reacting to that, right? And you still need to use the products, right, to see a benefit to them. So, ultimately, I would say try to avoid the top 5 most common allergens, maybe the top 10 most common allergens. And also, if you are personally allergic to something, then obviously you want to look at the back of every ingredient list and make sure that, you're not allergic to it. Or you could watch our videos on YouTube. We talk about products all the time.
Okay. Here we go. This is it. This is how you go through it. I'm going to just come up with this right now. It's very simple. 1, you want to look for a short ingredient list. I think that's actually very helpful. It might be understated, not because all of the ingredients don't have a purpose, but because the longer the list, the more likely you're going to be allergic to something. In fact, there was I was using a lot of products. Should I call it the brand? I used a SkinCeuticals, highly reputable brand. Loved most of their products. It was a facial
reputable
mist. Is that good? Bad? Let me Google this.
Isn't it reputable? I could be wrong. Like, no. Like, I could be saying, like, I said disheveled my whole life and not disheveled. So I could be wrong. I thought it was reputable. Is it reputable? Can we get a tiebreaker? Lou, can you chime in?
It's reputable.
Lou has it as reputable. All right. Okay, we got at least 2v1 right now.
Yeah, but you all are reading in the 20th century. My readings come from the late 19th century.
The old English Oxford. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Luke Maxfield. Lord Luke Maxfield over here.
Which, yeah, by the way, I also found out you can like buy a plot in Scotland and become officially a lord. That's a whole nother thing, kind of tempting. But anyway, short list. I would. I do want to earn it. But so anyway, but there's this facial spray, right, from SkinCeuticals, like good brand. Most people think highly of this brand is quality. As soon as I read the back of the ingredient list, it's like, oh, this is going to be a problem. I don't have allergies. I don't know that I'm allergic to anything except for maybe penicillin. But I sprayed this on my face. 3 days later, the worst allergic reaction I've ever had topically in my life.
You had an allergic reaction to something?
Yeah, and I don't have sensitive skin.
I'm not gonna lie, I feel a little bit of redemption here that you had an allergic, because I told you, okay, I'm the nutty one when it comes to allergens. I'll give you that. Like, I'm the one that's always trying to avoid allergens. I got the sensitive eyelids. I'm always like freaking out about fragrance, and he's the one that's all laissez-faire over here. You know, all is good. You could put dirt on your face; it will be fine. And then he got an allergic reaction. I'm not happy about it. I'm a little bit, but I am a little bit like told you so right now.
Yeah. Well, you know, my perspective.
What was in it? Like, tell me like the five like what were the allergens that you would, or was it just because the list was long?
No, it was both. So I think with most of these natural products, and this isn't one of those, but most natural products, you'll start with like the top 10 ingredients, and a lot of them will look good. There's like, you know, water, glycerin, like hyaluronic acid and things like, okay, good. This has a purpose. And then you get to numbers like 10 through, in this case, probably 25 or 30. And you're like, oh, I don't know if this is necessary or if this is helpful. In fact, it could be bad. So here, you know, we've like fragrance, we have linalool, we have, let's see here, a lot of colorants, which I don't know if there's really allergic potential, but they're unnecessary. And then a lot of plant-based ingredients. Again, just the more plants you use, the more likely you're going to have an allergy to some of them, or irritation, in this case, allergy.
Yeah, you know, I agree. So, you know, I actually think this is a controversial opinion, actually, that shorter ingredient lists are better. I would say that for the most part, unless the whole list is like, you know, water plus fragrance, right? Like that's a short ingredient list, but it's not a great ingredient list, which there are like fragrant waters that people spray on their face,
for sure,
to be fair. But that being said, I generally agree that shorter ingredient lists, barring any major allergens, are better and safer than longer ingredient lists. And that's just my personal experience. Even like, I can look at a really long ingredient list and it's got no common allergens that I know to avoid. And those products I have reacted to much more than the shorter ingredient product list. So I'm sort of on board from that, from a like anecdotal experience, but I'd be actually curious to see if there's any studies on the length of ingredient lists versus allergic potential, because that would be really interesting.
Yeah, it would be. Someone needs to put that together, and we'll appreciate it if you do. So, okay, length of ingredient list was one. We'll say, okay, maybe we're on the fence with that. The second thing, fragrance-free. I am 100% with Dr. Shaw on this. Fragrance-free is the most important thing you could do if you have sensitive skin, eczema, or just wanting to be cautious. I have no arguments there. Do I use fragrant products? Yes, because I haven't had a problem with that. I know about my skin. Although fragrance mix is unquantified, qualified, you don't know what's in it exactly. I've not had a problem with that before. So I think that's number 2.
Yeah. So going into fragrance free, you know, most of the time I agree. You know, you say fragrance free, that is generally going to be a safer product than not fragrance free or unscented or scented products. That being said, there are some products that do claim fragrance free and are not fragrance free. Mm-hmm. You know, they have like some type of aromatic compounds in them that are like doubling as stabilizers or preservatives, and they do produce a fragrance, and then people do react to them. So it's not completely foolproof, but I would say of all the claims you'll see on the front of a package, I would say that fragrance free is probably the most reliable.
Okay, yeah. So fragrance-free being superior to unscented, I'd say being superior to dermatologist approved, dermatology approved, whatever those variations would be. And then maybe number 3, what you could look for is the National Eczema Association Seal of Acceptance, which again isn't perfect. But it does go before a board, and they do vet some of these. Well, they do vet these products and the ingredients, and they screen out some of the more problematic things. Now, I've talked about brands and products that are on this list. Some of them contains allergens. They're not all perfect. They're all not completely as gentle as you could possibly want. But again, if you're looking for three things, that might be the place to start.
Yeah, again, I think I agree with you on that. Most of the time, good products. Most of the time, the people that seek out that seal of approval tend to be trying to get that approval of hypoallergenic in general, and so those products tend to, have more of that dermatology background in the first place, and so you can almost assume that they're going to be safer. But again, I've also seen like common allergens in those products as well. So, I think that again, like, there's no like foolproof method for you to hang your hat on. But overall, I would say that, I try to limit the recommendations I make. I try to limit the allergic potential as much as possible. Barring that, I don't think there's a better product in that price range. And there's so many other things that are to consider here. For example, like Nizoral shampoo. I recommend all the time. It's got fragrance in it. There is no competitive product on the market that doesn't have fragrance. So there's just several other examples I can give you of this where there's products with fragrance that are great or products with common allergens that are great, and you can't avoid them. But I try to limit it because it sucks when you have an allergic reaction. It sets you back months, weeks in your routine. You can't use other products. You don't know what caused it. You have to throw out maybe more than one product because you don't know which one triggered it. And it's frustrating, I think, for everybody that it happens to, and probably frustrating when it finally happened to you.
Yeah, it was. Next, though, I think, so anything else on the natural you want to talk about? I know we're going to transition into something here too.
No. All right. So moving on to facial massage.
Right. So facial massage, if you haven't seen a video on this, there are plenty out there. Just look it up. The theory behind this is that through movements, either with your hands or a tool called a gua sha tool, which is not at all used as it was historically to move and manipulate the skin and soft tissue, you can do almost anything. You can restructure your face, you can restructure your fat, you can restructure, sometimes they'll say, the bones. Now, there's a very strong following of people who wholeheartedly believe in this. And some of them are kind enough to share some studies with me and say, hey, look, once again, just like I talked about before, there is a published study. There may be 2 published studies showing this can be helpful. Now, that wasn't enough to move the needle for me.
Wait a minute. Hang on a second. Let's give some context here. Hold on a second. Rewind. Okay. So facial massage, right? We've seen it touted. There are actually even in-person places you can go to get a facial massage now. There are businesses built around facial massage. There are tools that are built around facial massage. A lot of people, moving into this facial massage. You're telling me that someone tried to convince you that facial massage was good? Was this like another creator, another dermatologist, or?
It was a creator. And honestly, I think they were fairly gracious because basically I likened what they were doing and promoting as doing absolutely nothing. And they responded with a study. And it was like, well, that was fair. That's a fair comeback.
Oh, so Nay, hang on a second. This isn't like a friendly, this was you reacted to their video, shading them, and then they responded with a study. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's it.
I don't think that's ever happened to me. And I shade people all the time. Maybe I just didn't see Has it happened?
You just don't, you have too many comments. You can't get through them all.
I don't know. I mean, listen. Okay. So we've been provided with a study here, and we'll read the name of the study. This is the analysis of morphological changes after facial massage by a novel approach using 3-dimensional computed tomography, or CT. And this was published in the Skin Research and Technology Journal. Okay. Terrible study, horrible study. Okay. I read the study, horrible. And listen, I'm not, it's a start. We have, first of all, starting out, 12 people in the study. Okay. Well, small sample size. Okay. Age range. Okay. Decent. 30 to 54, where you're probably seeing most people doing the facial massage. And, they really did do their best to make it scientific here. They have before and after photos And then they also evaluated with this this 3-dimensional CT scan of the face to see if there were any changes to the skin after this massage. The reason why I think this is not helpful at all, and you could chime in here and let me know what your thoughts on this are, is because this was done like right after the massage. So like I've always maintained that like putting ice on your face, massaging your face, facial exercise, like clenching your jaw and moving your jaw, like all of those are going to have temporary changes to the face because like they're going to improve blood flow temporarily. They're going to maybe cause some temporary swelling and edema. Maybe they're going to constrict the blood vessels in the case of ice. So definitely long short-term benefits, or maybe short-term changes, let's say, short-term changes when you do any of these things. But I don't think there are long-term sustainable benefits to this.
See, and that's exactly it. So that was my main problem with this as well. So it's very difficult, though, I think, for the general public. They see something like this and they're like, hey, it's a study. Like, is this PubMed indexed? I don't know about this journal. And that's the problem, too. There's a lot of small journals that publish it. Like, we've published a lot. And we know for a fact there's a lot of journals out there where you pay a lot of money to get your paper published. And so with that comes this kind of overflow of information that's really not well vetted, but appears to be. And I think this falls into that category. Not that this shouldn't be published, because I think it's good to start the discussion with this or similar topics. But just like Dr. Shaw, my main problem is like, what was the timing from the facial massage to the imaging? Because no matter what trauma you do for your skin or for your face, if you image right afterwards with a high quality imaging, there are going to be changes. It's just, is it a product purely of irritation and inflammation? Or is it actually a functional structural change that's beneficial and has lasting effects? And there are a few other studies I went through after that, just made sure I wasn't missing anything. There was another study with similar, a CT study, looking at 5 people with similar results, but that's about it. And so again, I just don't, see one thing I think too, even before we come to these clinical studies, it goes through that same filter I talked about before. Like, does this line up with what we know about biology, just human biology? Does this line up with what we know about physiology? And then can it be extrapolated from there into clinical real world data? It really has to check all the boxes for me.
Yeah, that's really the scientific method that we really need to be analyzing things. That was actually, Dr. Kligman, who discovered, invented tretinoin, had this sort of process about the way that he looked at skincare ingredients. Controversial figure, by the way. We can probably talk about him on a future episode. But Albert Kligman believed that in order to say that a product worked, one, you needed to know that it could actually reach the targeted area, right? So like in the case of topicals, it would need to penetrate the skin, right, to be effective. So one, you need to know that it could actually be where it's supposed to be. 2, it would need to have a mechanism of action that made sense, right? Like theoretically even, right? The question is, does facial massage have some type of theoretical benefit to the skin? I mean, I think in some ways, by helping to move lymphatic fluid, you could help with people that maybe have some puffiness in the morning or something like that. So you could expect that, but again, you wouldn't expect any long-term changes to the collagen or anything like this. But that being said, like there needs to be a mechanism. And then the third piece of that was always that there needed to be clinical studies showing that these actually worked. So 1, you needed to actually reach the target area. 2, you need to actually have a mechanism that makes sense. And then 3, you need to actually have clinical studies that are showing that it actually it does what we expect it to do in theory. And so those are the 3 criteria. And a lot of the things that are recommended don't meet those 3 criteria.
Right, exactly. Which brings us full circle back to the natural thing, is that just it's tough for people to, I think, convince me as a doctor of some of the benefits without any of those links in the chain, or one of those links in the chain. And this kind of falls in there too, is just a physical aspect of something that people are promoting widely and the results that really aren't founded.
I think that's fair. Again, though, I think, even though I don't think there are tremendous benefits, I don't think that these should be used in lieu of other things. Most of the time not harmful. And, I have heard the argument that gua sha, not done correctly when we see it on TikTok, as we discussed, but Apparently there are maybe some scientific literature in other languages that have been published on the benefits of it. And so, I wouldn't, again, throw away things that have been around for before we've been alive. But again, I don't expect any miracle changes to the bone by massaging your face. If you have the extra 5 minutes, 10 minutes, then have at it.
Yeah, I agree with you too. An interesting thing about the gua sha literature that I could find is a lot of it's done with like breast fullness, breast milk, headaches, which makes some sense. But again, the way they're using this and doing this is fairly aggressive to the point of inducing bruising and purpura, and not at all like the very nice experiential light massage that's been popularized lately.
100% agree. All right, so I think that covers it. Facial massage, I'm not doing it. You could do it if you want. But let's move on to the next topic here. And this is about putting deodorant all over your body to stop sweating. Is it safe? Can you put deodorant all over your body?
So no. I mean, there's a couple inherent problems here. And we see this with people who have hyperhidrosis because some people have focal parts of their body where they sweat. Some people just sweat overall too much or more than is normal or disruptive to their life. And so the question is, one, what happens if you actually successfully stop sweating all over your whole body? That's problematic in and of itself. And then two comes the idea of ingredients. What if you cover yourself with whatever deodorant you're using over your whole body? To what extent are you absorbing the ingredients? How much of a problem is that going to be? And I think those are the two main pitfalls that we're going to have to run into here with people who are going to try to do this.
Yeah, I actually wanted to, it's so funny. It's not funny actually, but I remember growing up, and this is before the internet, which I think people understate, right? Like the idea that nowadays, like if you say something to me, right, and I'm kind of skeptical about it, like I just Google it, right? Like I'll Google it right away, or or we use Dr. Google, right, which is like up to date. So like if I'm ever skeptical of something, I just can find the information at my fingertips, right? And there were so many rumors I remember as a kid believing to be true, and everybody believed it. And the funny thing about it is that like if you talk to people nowadays, like a rumor that existed in New York where I grew up probably existed where you grew up in Colorado, right?
Yeah.
So I think that being said, it's first of all interesting how that information traveled. But anyway, going back to this, the reason why I say this is because I was told several times that when I growing up that if you put deodorant all over your body, you'll die. That there were like several stories of a kid or kids who have died from putting deodorant all over their body, and there have been a few, believe it or not, and I don't know like if this is related to them being aerosoled, but like if you look at 2016, Fox News, police found 42 aerosol cans in this 16-year-old rooms, and the patient was the child had died, and I think it was due to butane gas inhalation. So I think that it wasn't related to the fact that they were putting deodorant all over their body, but the fact that maybe the butane from the spray on deodorants actually caused this. But I remember believing that if you didn't sweat, you would die. Though there is some credence to that, though I don't know that there's ever been a case of someone dying from not being able to sweat, but there are conditions, right, where we don't develop our eccrine sweat glands, like conditions like hypohidrotic ectodermal dysplasia, where essentially you don't develop sweat glands and then you can overheat and have like heat strokes, because the function of sweating is to remove heat from the body most of the time. And in that process, if you're not able to do it and you're out in really high temperature, is that you could essentially overheat if you had deodorant all over your body. But I don't think that you can die from putting deodorant all over your body.
Right. So that's
to be fair, antiperspirants, not deodorants. We have to specify the difference between the two.
Okay, and that's fair too. So deodorant is something that masks an odor, covers an odor. The antiperspirant is what stops the sweating, and that's usually the salt compounds that block those eccrine glands. And I guess that's part of it is, I think when we give medications like glycopyrrolate to people who are sweating excessively, it stops the sweating overall from the inside out. It doesn't stop it 100%, but with that, we're concerned, hey, do you work outside? We try to use it judiciously. Don't put them in situations where they're going to overheat and not be able to sweat to control their temperature effectively. So I think in theory it's possible if you use an antiperspirant all over your body that it could become a problem, especially if done in mass. I'm with you. I'm not sure about the published literature, but also while we're talking about this, I don't know how this didn't occur to me earlier, but why even in this article, I don't know if it like necessarily addresses that fully. Why was this original creator wanting to put deodorant, antiperspirant all over their body? Because we don't sweat evenly across our entire body, and we don't have odorific areas all over our body. It's unnecessary.
Fair enough. So okay, there's a lot to unpack there. Okay, so number one, there are people with like generalized hyperhidrosis, like you mentioned, that have that sweat in a way that it's debilitating, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they can't even like it's difficult to function. They sweat so much. They sweat through their clothes. A lot of times, like you said, it's focal where it only affects certain parts of the body, like the hands and the armpits. And those are a little bit easier to spot treat. But for people with whole body hyperhidrosis, the medications that we usually use to treat are systemic medications like your glycopyrrolate. So if you don't have access to oral glycopyrrolate, then you may want to put deodorant all over your body. Sorry, antiperspirants all over your body. I think this is going to be really confusing for people, but antiperspirants, you may want to put it all over your body if you're sweating excessively. I think the other case that I see this in is almost like a beauty hack. I don't know if you've seen this one, but people putting deodorant specifically on their face to have their makeup layer better. Have you seen this in any capacity?
I have not. No.
So I think, one of the problems is some people sweat when they wear makeup. And a lot of times deodorants are mattifying, antiperspirants are mattifying. And so if you're able to block your sweat and also mattify, it's almost like a primer for your makeup. And so I've seen this like sort of touted as a beauty hack. One, I think this would clog your pores on your face and could potentially cause acne. I mean, if you have acne-genic bacteria in your pores, theoretically, using these aluminum salts and whatnot could potentially contribute. I don't know if there's any scientific evidence that that's true. I would be concerned about it. That being said, what could you do? What are our options, right, for people that do have sweating either focally, systemically, or just on the face?
Right. And so even as doctors, we're kind of limited because of what things are approved for. But there is like a little ladder you can do. And so you can use something like Drysol or aluminum chloride. It's a similar thing. But it's in a liquid formulation. And so people are encouraged to wipe that on the focal areas, not bathe in it, but like put it on the focal areas where it's been problematic. There are other topicals that you can use like Cuprexa, which is it's the brand name of a topical form of that oral medication, if that made sense to anybody. So the medication that stops sweating we take by mouth, it's in a topical wipe. It's only approved for the armpits and the axilla, which I think is unfortunate because I find that it's actually very effective and could be more generalizable and helpful for people if it was more widely available. And then from there are certain procedures that you could use as well. Iontophoresis, I know something Dr. Shaw's talked about before, where you basically put your hands in a solution of electrolytes and zap yourself lightly. I've done it. I've tried it. It's not terrible, but again, blocks and
slightly uncomfortable pores. Though. It's uncomfortable. Say it is slightly uncomfortable. So iontophoresis, you put your hands in water, and essentially the electricity. It kind of gives you this really like weird feeling. I mean, I don't know if you get used to it. I just tried it a few times myself before I wanted to recommend it to people.
Right.
It works though. Like it works. You need several treatments. Those treatments can be expensive. They have some at-home treatments now, like Dermadry. I think it's called Dermadry. That you can put your hands in and helps. Right. So that's another option for people, specifically for hands. Sometimes for armpits. I find that it works better for hands and feet. Than other areas. And then there's Miradry, which is a way to like essentially zap away your eccrine glands in your armpits. And that tends to be really helpful for people, specifically in the armpit region. And then Botox, I think Botox is worth mentioning here. Botox inhibits the release of acetylcholine, and acetylcholine is what contributes to sweating. So what happens with sweating is your body releases acetylcholine. Acetylcholine acts on the eccrine glands. You start sweating. And so by blocking that acetylcholine transmission, then you can stop your sweating. And so Botox effectively does that. And you can get it in the armpits. You can get it in the hands. It's very painful. You need many treatments to do it. But what I've also noticed is that people, they get Botox in their forehead for wrinkles. it reduces the sweating to some extent in the forehead.
See, and I think that's one, nice that it's useful. Two is there's something called compensatory hyperhidrosis, though, that people struggle with. And it can occur, I think, with any of these things. But where you do any of the treatments, it's effective on one area and you sweat more in another area. And so with Botox, I don't know why. I feel like I've seen that more with Botox, and it might be because of how effective Botox is at treating hyperhidrosis. But let's say you sweat on your lips and your armpit, you treat your armpits with Botox, you might sweat more off the top of the lip. So none of these are perfect, but they're all options that can be helpful for a lot of people.
All right. So overall, deodorant all over your body, it's probably okay, or antiperspirants all over your body, probably okay. Don't recommend it. We do have other treatments for hyperhidrosis, many treatments in dermatology. So seek out your dermatologist if you're looking for any treatments there. Otherwise, I don't know why you'd want to do this in the first place. Next up, all right, this is going to be quick. We're going to summarize it's going to be a quick run. This is for Dr. Maxfield, no preparation. I'm going to yell out a skincare trend, and I'll explain it briefly. And then you tell me in one line, no long explanations. Are we keeping this trend going into 2023, or are we trashing this trend? Okay. You ready? All right. So first up, skinimalism. This is where you're limiting your skincare routine, not 10 steps, but 3 or 4 steps. Keeping it or trashing it? Keeping it. Okay. I agree. Next up is skin taping. Skin taping is where you tape your face up to hold it in position. Are we keeping this one, or are we trashing this one?
Trash, definitely. I got so much hate from the skin taping brands when I roasted this on my Instagram.
Yeah, not good for the skin. I completely agree. Trashing it. Next up is menstrual facials. Menstrual fluid facials coming back in hot. What do we thought? Keep it or trash it?
I trash it.
Yeah, I made a video about this and I got a lot of hate, so I'm going to stay quiet on this one, but I silently agree with you. So next up is skin cycling. We've talked about it on our YouTube channel. This is essentially where you rotate, you exfoliate day 1, retinoid day 2, take 2 days of a break where you just moisturize, and then you start that cycle over again. We keeping it or trashing it?
I'd say keep-ish, but it'll be modified. It's already morphing.
Okay. So yeah, I agree. I think it's in between. We keep it for beginners, and then we expand from there. So yeah, that's an in-betweener, and we have a much longer video on it if you're interested. And next up, just because of the time of the year and because it's the most number one search thing in skincare right now, slugging, where you take Vaseline as the last step in your skincare routine, or any occlusive petrolatum-based ointment as the last step in your skincare routine. Keeping it or trashing it? Keeping it. I love slugging this time. I've already slugged last night. So always keeping the slug. All right. So that's pretty good. Let us know if you like that. Definitely, it's not subscribe to the podcast. Subscribe to our channel, but enroll in our podcast.
Lou,
what is it?
It's follow the podcast.
Follow or subscribe to the podcast, coming from you everywhere. Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to your podcasts, we'll be there. See you in the next one.
We'll see you next time. Appreciate you all.
Stay classy, San Diego.